Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. It seems like any problem, and for that matter, any solution that you look at in the country today, and yes, the country, not the world, it all comes down to a discussion about one thing, one entity. China. If we're talking about healthcare and things like COVID, so often that becomes a China discussion. If we're talking about the economy and trade, very quickly that becomes a China discussion, especially this week with the tariff situation. If we're talking about cultural issues, like why young people are on their phones all the time, yeah, very quickly that becomes a China discussion with respect to things like TikTok. If we're talking about international issues, domestic issues, even issues like climate change, time and again, the issue becomes China. Now, there are some people that think we need to take the temperature down with China a little bit, kind of similar to President Nixon's approach in the 70s. Others think, no, we need the exact opposite approach. We need to reverse 2.5 decades of getting cozy with China. Someone who I think falls in the latter category is Stephen W. Mosher. He's an author and a columnist, written many books about the China situation. These days, he's the president of the Population Research Institute, author of several books, including The Devil and Communist China. Stephen, it's great to talk with you again. Thanks for joining me on the radio.
Well, it's good to be with you here, Frank, and I will tell you, you have categorized me correctly. I am a critic of China, have been for a long time, since I was in China in 1979, first American social scientist on the ground in China. And I was in the operating room when they were doing forced abortions on women who were 9 months pregnant by cesarean section, and eyewitness cases of infanticide, the killing of babies after birth. So I have been a critic of the Chinese Communist Party for a long time, and for very good reasons.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about that. Tell folks a little bit about your professional and personal background. You alluded to the fact that you're a social scientist. How did you make that transition from, academia to being outspoken as a researcher and an advocacy leader in terms of criticizing communist China? How did that happen?
Well, that's an interesting question because how did I make the transition? I basically didn't make the transition. I was transitioned out of Stanford University after the Chinese Communist Party complained about my research in China, complained about my criticism of human rights in China, complained about my criticism of the one-child policy, which has been a disaster for China, by the way, and said to Stanford University that no Stanford professor or researcher will ever be welcome in China again unless they punish me. So they punished me by dismissing me from Stanford and freeing me, basically, Frank, for the work of being an objective observer of China who's not worried about offending anyone on either side of the Pacific. I stand on the side of human rights. I stand on the side of the Chinese people. And I'll tell you, the Chinese people have been the first and foremost victims of the Chinese Communist Party from the very beginning. I mean, we can talk about the fentanyl deaths here, the million deaths that wouldn't have happened without China supplying the precursors to fentanyl. We can talk about China releasing COVID on the world and killing people around the world. But look, the largest number of victims are found among the Chinese people themselves. Between the famines and the persecutions and the Cultural Revolution and the purges, 100 million Chinese have been killed in China by the Chinese Communist Party. And hey, if you want to talk about the number of babies killed in the one-child policy, many in the second and third trimester, many after birth, that's another 400 million. So these are not nice people.
All right, so let's talk about where we are today. Everybody is focusing on the tariff issue, And understandably, it's causing a lot of consternation, and some people wondering if it's the right move. Now you have the United States and China exchanging new tariff threats. China threatening reciprocal tariffs. Trump says, "Oh yeah, well we're going to throw more tariffs on you." Do you think the Trump era tariffs from the first Trump administration actually worked? I will note that President Biden kept just about all of those tariffs on, even after he was elected. Critics argue they hurt American farmers and consumers more than they hurt the Chinese Communist Party. What's your take?
Well, my take, and look, I agree with President Trump here on the damage that has been done by the fact that not just China, but virtually every country in the world has taken advantage of the fact that we have the largest consumer market in the world to ship their goods here while preventing with tariff barriers and, look, non-tariff barriers and regulatory barriers, keeping American products out of their own countries. So it hasn't been a level playing field for a long time. And people have to understand how this came about. At the end of World War II, we had 50% of the world's GDP in the United States. We had 50% of the world's industrial production. Half of everything that was made in our own country. And the reason was Europe had been destroyed, Japan had been destroyed, and we had what was left. Well, that percentage has gradually decreased over time. We can no longer afford to support the rest of the world. We have to start thinking about ourselves. And it's well overdue to take on China and straighten out our relationship with them, because they have been cheating from the very beginning. People need to understand that when the Soviet Union fell in September of 1991, Deng Xiaoping, the leader of China at the time, convened a meeting with 7,000 senior Communist Party officials and said this. We know he said this. He said, the old Cold War is over. The United States has won. The new Cold War is beginning. China will win this one. So they have been in a Cold War with us across all domains from 1991 on. And we have been asleep at the switch.
30 minutes after the hour, this is The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is Stephen Mosher. His books include The Devil and Communist China. Just staying with the tariff situation for a moment, would you support blanket tariffs on all Chinese goods? And if so, how do you reconcile that with concerns about inflation and the supply chain impact on everyday Americans?
Well, here's what's going to happen, Frank. And there are two things to look at here. One is China's economy is already in desperate straits. Its real estate sector is collapsing. Industrial production is down. And so we're putting Xi Jinping in a corner. If he wants to get in a so-called tariff war with the United States, and they've been waging war with us for decades, as we talked about, then he's going to upset the communist oligarchy there that has huge fortunes, mostly based on exports. So if he destroys the economy of China in this tariff war, he will be removed by the other Chinese communist leaders, all of whom are worth billions of dollars. I mean, communism doesn't work, but it's a great way for the leaders to get rich, as everyone knows. And the other thing that will happen is if he concedes on the tariff front, then he loses face. He looks weak at home, and he encourages the other Chinese communist leaders to remove him. So he's in a very difficult spot, and there's going to be instability in China that may result in his being removed and are getting a more amenable regime in Beijing that we can deal with. Number one. Number two, every country in the world is going to have to choose whether or not they want to live under Chinese domination or continue to live in the existing world order with the United States helping to guarantee freedom of transport, freedom of the oceans, and so forth. And I think all the countries except China are probably going to choose to be with us rather than with them. And I think this is going to sort itself out very, very quickly as one country after another comes to terms with Trump and everyone lines up on the right side, which is to say our side, and against China. And China will wind up at the end of the day isolated and alone. We can source these goods that we get from China and Vietnam, the Philippines, and India, and other countries. We've already started doing that because of the tariffs in the first Trump administration. This will speed up that process. There'll be some dislocations, but it's nothing that we can't get through as a country. And at the end of the day, we will be far better off. We will have a much more robust and prosperous middle class. Wages will go up. The economy will grow stronger, and the stock market will recover.
One of the things that it sounds like if we followed your economic policy prescriptions we'd be doing is essentially decoupling our economy from China's. Just to be clear, what is your position on decoupling? Is full economic decoupling from China even possible? Or does it just hand more of the global market to some of the countries that you just mentioned, like India and Vietnam, who might also be playing both sides? As obviously, as people know, Vietnam's a communist country too.
Well, it is, and I'm not a big fan of communism anywhere, as you know, whether it be in Vietnam or North Korea. On the other hand, the Vietnamese were among the first to call the White House and say, let's make a deal, because they realize that trade with the United States is very important. And I will tell you this, that ordinary Vietnamese, not just in the South but the North, like the United States very, very much. They all have friends or relatives who moved here and succeeded. There's lots of traffic back and forth between California, the West Coast, and Vietnam. Lots of money, lots of remittances going back and forth. So let's not focus too much on the fact that it's a communist regime, because we have close ties with the Vietnamese people. India is a country that shares our values and institutions. They have democratic elections. They more or less respect human rights. No democracy is perfect. So I'd much rather buy something made in India by a country that shares our values and institutions rather than one made by what are virtual serfs in China. People need to know that workers in China are not free to organize labor unions. The person who tried to do that years ago was arrested and sentenced to long prison terms. People in China can't strike for higher wages. They can't engage in labor slowdowns. Workers in China are often not paid by factory owners who are in cahoots with the Chinese Communist Party. When they protest, what happens? The police come out and beat them up. So, if you're comfortable buying products made by virtual slave labor, that's fine, but I'm not.
Yeah, it's not exactly a worker's paradise, that's for sure. If people are tuning in, this is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Moreno. My guest is Stephen Mosher. He's the president of the Population Research Institute. Stephen, let me ask you about what's going on with TikTok. Obviously, Congress passed and President Biden signed and the Supreme Court upheld legislation that would force ByteDance, a Chinese company, to divest from TikTok and sell it to an American company. So far, they have refused to do so, and President Trump gave them a 75-day reprieve to figure this out, figure out a sale, or come face to face with being prohibited in the United States. As far as you're concerned, should TikTok be banned in the United States or just forced to divest? And if you support a ban, how do you respond to critics who say this opens the door for digital censorship and sets a dangerous precedent for banning other media platforms?
TikTok is owned by ByteDance, which is a Chinese company, which is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And literally, you can say that about any Chinese company, because all major Chinese companies have to have a member of the Chinese Communist Party formally on their board of directors, and all Chinese companies have to have a Communist Party cell inside the organization, that is, a Communist Party organization among the workers of the organization. So the party is in control of all the companies in China. Now, it uses TikTok for two purposes. One purpose is to gather information, our personal information, our contacts, and other information, and send it back to servers in China. That's not good. That's strike one. Strike two is they use it for psychological manipulation of young people in the United States. Now, much of this is self-inflicted, I understand. It's influencers in the United States producing this content. But people need to understand that in China, TikTok doesn't operate this way. In China, TikTok encourages young people to do science experiments at home. It encourages them to go to school. It encourages them to read books and get an education. The government in China makes sure that some of the stuff that's on TikTok in the United States is not allowed in China. Mm-hmm. They're happy to allow it here. Now, what happens if we have control of TikTok? Well, some of the bad stuff stays on TikTok. We're not talking about censoring that. We are talking about making sure that the algorithm, we have access to the algorithm that was designed in China, and I guarantee you has a backdoor to send data back to China. Just like the Chinese robot dogs have a backdoor where they can access the robot dog remotely and seize control of it from back in China. It's amazing to think about, but that's a part of the electronics, complicated electronics and algorithms that are produced in China. The Communist Party wants access to them for spying purposes. That has to stop. Now, if the Chinese company is a minority owner and we have control of the algorithm and they are no longer to introduce upgrades, for example, quote unquote upgrades, then we're probably safe from that sort of spying, and we can host the information on servers in the U.S. And kids will continue to be kids. So we're talking about the censorship is happening in China. The data theft is happening in China. We want to end the data theft. We don't want censorship.
Understood. You've also alleged possible Chinese involvement in the cyber attacks preceding the October 7th Hamas attack, if I'm correct. What proof do you have of that? Should the U.S. formally accuse Beijing of doing this, or are we still operating in the fog of plausible deniability?
Well, we know that Hamas, in the years leading up to the attack on Israel, got rid of all of its Western software and hardware and began using, about a year and a half before the invasion, before the attack, let's call it an attack, they began using Huawei equipment. Huawei is a major Chinese computer company, so they were using Huawei phones and computers produced in China, and the speculation is, and I believe this is valid, that Israeli intelligence did not have advance warning of the attack because they were using Chinese equipment, which was harder to penetrate because it was made in China. Now, the fact that they switched to Huawei equipment tells me that the Chinese Communist Party, Beijing, knew exactly what Hamas was up to, right? Because they have backdoors into their Huawei equipment.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
This episode is brought to you by GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco. Get the most out of your vehicle with GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco original equipment. The only parts designed, engineered, tested, and backed by General Motors. You can find your perfect fit for most makes and models and choose from 3 tiers of parts, including GM OE or gold and silver aftermarket parts. Visit gmparts.com for more information.
Jif peanut butter. It's that jiffing good, it doesn't really need advertising. So instead, enjoy the calming sounds of the ocean. Jif. Ooh, it's that jiffing good. Get your Jif at jif.com.
Well, I mean, it stands to reason. I mean, it's very compelling. You argue that China is engaging in gray zone warfare, like cutting undersea cables. Is the U.S. engaged in similar clandestine activity with agencies like the NSA and cyber operation? Where is the line between legitimate espionage and acts of war, as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think I'm a former naval officer, Frank, and I served a long time ago. I was with the Seventh Fleet, homeported in Tokyo Bay, and when you have a ship dragging an anchor back and forth over the known location of a underwater communications cable, you know that's deliberate. If you're driving a ship and you happen to drop anchor, you know about it because the anchor drags across the bottom and it slows you down. That's the purpose of the anchor. So these attacks on the undersea cables, which occurred north of Taipei, which occurred off the island of Matsu, which is one of the offshore islands that Taiwan owns. These attacks were quite deliberate. They were carried out by freighters that were registered in other countries like Panama, but had Chinese captains and Chinese crews. So these are deliberate attacks to cut Taiwan off from communications with the outside world in the event of an attack by China on Taiwan. That would leave them, if you cut off all the communications cables, that would leave Taiwan dependent upon satellite communications. And those could be disabled if you set off an electronic, an EMP bomb, electromagnetic pulse bomb in the atmosphere to fry all the satellites and all the electronics attached to an antenna. And then Taiwan would be unable to communicate with the outside world, and it would be easier prey for a Chinese invasion force. So that's what cutting the cables is all about. It's really, you can call it gray zone warfare. And it kind of is because it's not something that's been done much before. The Russians have done it in the Baltics, cutting a couple of cables. But that's really quite aggressive. We've also seen that kind of aggressive activity, though, from the Chinese Navy in other ways. Mm-hmm. Chinese naval vessels are built now with reinforced bows. Why do you reinforce the bow of a ship? Well, you reinforce it for ramming purposes. And Chinese Coast Guard vessels have rammed Japanese Coast Guard vessels in the past. It's a very effective gray zone tactic because the Chinese said, well, the Japanese captain was a poor navigator. He maneuvered into us when clearly from the photographic evidence, the Chinese ship rammed the Japanese one. So that kind of gray zone warfare is very, very destabilizing. You have Chinese jets tailing American electronic surveillance planes and coming within a few feet of them. That caused a crash back in the days of the George Bush presidency, as you recall, and our plane had to make an emergency landing in the Chinese-controlled island of Hainan. Those are all very dangerous tactics. They're happening a lot in the South China Sea, vis-a-vis Vietnam, vis-a-vis the Philippines, other countries that have legitimate claims on the South China Sea that are being denied and invaded by China. So this is very aggressive and destabilizing behavior, and it could very easily spark a conflict.
You've praised Tulsi Gabbard's report on the Chinese Communist Party corruption as a shot across the bow. But beyond rhetorical intimidation, what actual policy mechanisms do you think the U.S. can and should actually use to go after the offshore assets of the Chinese Communist Party elites? Isn't there a danger of turning this into, some sort of performative geopolitics?
Well, I think a lot of geopolitics is performative, quite frankly. And I think that the reason why people are sometimes surprised at Trump's actions because he's not doing it for show. He's not doing it for clicks. He's doing it because he believes that it's in the interest of the United States. But look, we've got several non-nuclear nuclear weapons that can be deployed against China. One of which is seizing the assets of the Chinese oligarchs. And I call them oligarchs because, look, the senior leaders of the Chinese Communist Party are, in almost all cases, worth billions of dollars. Now, this in itself is an amazing fact, because how can you, on a monthly salary of $5,000 or $10,000, which is what they get, accumulate such vast wealth? Well, we know how they do it. They're on the take. They engage in graft. They sell promotions in the army from major general to full general. It's a certain amount of money. They sell offices throughout the government, various ministries. To become minister, vice minister, you pay a bribe to the sitting premier. Wen Jiabao, the sitting premier from 2002 to 2012, reportedly landed his career with a fortune of almost $3 billion. That would be impossible to amass on his official party salary. We know the current leader of China, Xi Jinping, has at least $1 billion of net worth, some of which is overseas, held by brothers and sisters and other relatives for safekeeping. Why do the oligarchs of China? Well, first of all, they're wealthy because they're exploiting the Chinese people, right? We know that about 1/6 of all the money that's produced by the blood, sweat, and tears of the Chinese people winds up in the pockets of Chinese Communist Party officials. We know that about another 1/6 is used to support the Communist Party apparatus, which is almost the same thing. All the foreign junkets, the resorts, their salaries, their limousines, their mansions are all paid for by the blood, sweat, and tears of the Chinese people. So that's about 1/3 of the Chinese economy goes to support the Chinese Communist Party. And party leaders understand the instability of the Chinese Communist Party system. They understand the possibility they could be purged at any time. They understand the ongoing factional warfare that occurs out of sight of the West, but is a constant. I mean, we talk about Machiavelli, we talk about Byzantine politics, everything Western, all the Western images pale in comparison to what really happens in China. Okay, so what do you do if you're a Chinese communist oligarch? You get as much money as you can that you collected overseas, where you think it will be safe. And where is it safe? In countries which enjoy the rule of law, like Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain. Well, if they think that money is at risk, we can modify their behavior by threatening to confiscate the assets they have overseas. Number one. We could also ban them. I mean, another nuclear weapon would be banning them from SWIFT, preventing financial transactions with China. You want to talk about decoupling? That would be decoupling overnight. It wouldn't be painless, and it wouldn't be something we would do unless we were in a conflict situation. But that is also a financial lever that we can use against the Chinese communist oligarchs. And we don't have, I hope we never have to use any of these mechanisms, aside from tariffs, to get China to play ball. But the Chinese need to know that we can certainly do to the Chinese leadership what we did to the Russian oligarchs and confiscate. Well, the one Russian oligarch lost a $700 million yacht, which has now been confiscated.
All right. Final question, and I'm just about out of time. So to the extent that you can answer it with a yes or a no, I'd appreciate, and I hope you'll come back because I always get a lot out of our conversations. Given everything that we know, everything that we've seen over the last 50 years, was it a mistake through the prism of hindsight for Nixon and Kissinger to open up China to trade and American interaction? Or was it simply a question of we've gone too far in the other direction? Knowing what we know now, were Nixon and Kissinger wrong?
That's a very difficult question, and it's hard to say yes or no. Was President Reagan wrong when he went to China and called it a so-called communist country because he was visiting an open-air market where people were free finally to buy and sell things? We were all hopeful up until Tiananmen, right? June 4th, 1989, that China would modernize, it would democratize, it would come to respect human rights. The Communist Party would gradually allow free elections. As naive as that sounds now, we believed that in the 1980s. That dream ended on Tiananmen Square when the Chinese Communist Party brought in troops and tanks to shoot down unarmed students in the central square and main streets of China's capital city. And we should have fundamentally altered our policy at that point in time. We didn't. And that's where the mistake was.
Stephen Mosher, it is always a treat to talk with you. I want to encourage everybody to check out your book, The Devil and Communist China. And Stephen also serves as the president of the Population Research Institute. I hope we can talk again. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
If you want to comment on any portion of our conversation, give me a call, 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.